Hey, thanks for tuning in. And just to let you know, this is a two-part series. So if you're just tuning in for the first time and you haven't listened to the first part of this two-part series, go back 1 week and listen to that episode. You're not going to want to miss out on all the great stuff we're talking about with Kevin Urrutia about growing and scaling businesses. The guy's done a lot of growing and scaling businesses, so he knows what he's talking about. It's a fantastic conversation. I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
Welcome to The Friday Habit with Benjamin Manley and Mark Labriola II.
The Friday Habit is for creators, entrepreneurs, and agency owners looking for actionable ideas on how to grow their business and be more profitable.
We'll pull from our combined knowledge of over 20 years and interview thought leaders that will inspire you and give you the motivation you need to kick your business into high gear. Buckle up. It's Friday.
At what point did you decide to kind of jump off and start Voy Media? And how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so Voy Media came about 2 years later. So basically, I was running the company for about 2 years. And at this time, like, I kind of just got bored of running it. I was just like, it's a good space. It's making me money, but I just got bored. I was like, I want to do something that's like exciting. Cause like, I was like, oh, I want to go maybe do programming stuff again. Cause like, obviously like my background is programming, but like running a cleaning company is like not really programming. It's more like operations heavy and management heavy. It's like you learn a different skill set. But by this time, my friend Wilson, he was doing like FBA stuff, so e-commerce, and he was telling me how much money he was making. And I was just like, oh my God, like I need to go do this. So I was like, so then like literally that's how I was. I was like, Wilson, like I want to do this. And can you help me find products? So then he was helping me find like he was selling outdoor gear stuff. And I was just like, it's working for you. I was like, I'm gonna do outdoor gear too. So then he's like, he got so mad at me. But I'm like, dude, like we could just trade lists. So I was like, we can sell stuff. Is that right? That makes sense. Yeah. I was like, it doesn't be the same exact product. It can be something similar. And then so then we basically started my outdoor gear company. Was doing that. And I've been to China like 3 times, been to the Canton Fair. I talked to our factories. So that led me into more like the paid stuff. Like we're doing Amazon ads, we're doing Google ads, we're doing Facebook ads. So I was doing that, and then that company's still running right now. And then that led me to start another company called Chester, which is a Chester Travels, which is a luggage company. And that was like a kind of a iteration on what we learned from the outdoor gear company, because we realized like anything with FBA was kind of getting anything small was just so many competitors. So by this time we had a little bit more cash and more money, and we wanted to build something bigger. So luggage is a big thing, and it wasn't something that was easy to produce. So then we said, hey, let's make something bigger and large item that's going to be hard to ship from China. But that way you need to be you need to have done FBA before or have e-commerce experience to really enter this market. And that's how we did Chester. That's worked a lot better because it's just a more difficult market, and we compete with like Samsung and Tumi there. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have so many questions. Before we jump on to the Chester Travel stuff, I actually have a question about maid sailors.
Yeah.
How was that finding a replacement for yourself there? What process was that like to find somebody to run your company that you started?
Oh, that was easy. I just told my brother, and he's like, all right, I'll do it. Yeah.
Well, all your solutions are your family. Like, I need somebody to clean. My brother.
Yeah. Hey, so my brother had like, by that time, my brother was an investment banker in the city. And then he was just like kind of tired of like working. So I was like, hey, like I have this thing, it's like working. And he's just like, and he was looking at it. He's like, he's like, Kevin, you're running it terribly. I'm like, yeah, look, but it's working. Like, this is why I need you. Right?
Nice.
And then I always tell, like, honestly, like the company wouldn't be what it is now without Edwin. He really, that's my brother's name. He really like manages everything for me now and just does it. And like, he cleaned up a ton of processes, and you don't realize how much stuff is like broken until like someone comes in and tells you like, oh wow, like this is so bad, and like
it makes sense and says, hey, you're like, oh, it makes sense, could have evolved this way, but they're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense.
Exactly. And then even for any company, I think finding someone to replace you is tough. And but even for like I think that's a really hard sort of job to do, because it's like so hard.
Yeah. So, and then with Chester Travels, the e-commerce luggage company, how does that process work? I've talked to a few people about this, but for you, did you do a lot of the design on the products? Did you hire a designer? I know you worked with factories.
Yes. So this is another good question. So Edwin, my brother, he went to school for architecture and actually designer, so he designed our luggages. Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think like I would have like Edwin's my older brother. He's a year older than me. Honestly, I can't do anything without him. But yeah, he helped design everything. So this was what was great about the luggage company versus kind of like what before, like the other FBA company we had. It was very like, hey, here's a product, can you go make it? And they're like, oh yeah, cool, we'll go make it. What's your logo, right? And then you slap a logo and you're ready to sell it. With the luggage company, it was very like, we're like, oh, we like this luggage, can you make it? They're like, no, like we need like a CAD drawing. We're like, oh crap, and then we're just like, oh, but first we're frustrated, and then we're like, oh wait, this is good. That means they can't just copy anybody, because now we can make our own thing, right? But then that whole process took like 6 months to get the mold done. We worked with like the YKK factory to make custom zippers, custom lining, custom everything interior, and even like custom straps for the inside. Took a really long time, and it took us about 6 months to make the carry-on luggage. And if you look at our website now, we have like all the other sizes, but we couldn't make those until maybe 6 months ago. And that was because we didn't have money. Like we just like, we were strapped for cash. We're just like, we can't produce the other stuff. Like people were like, oh my God, like you make everything. I'm like, no, like we only have the carry-on, and like we were selling the carry-on for like a good year and a half. So.
Yeah, it's beautiful, by the way. The luggage is really nice. And was that a hefty upfront investment to start it for e-commerce? Is it like, hey, you got to invest a lot upfront in order to kind of get it rolling, or how does that usually work?
Yeah, so for the luggage company, that was about like $250K investment, and that's the reason why we started it, because we knew it was going to be a lot of money, and we knew that people just couldn't start it out. Whereas like the outdoor gear company, we knew that it was a less invest, like 5 to 10K, and that's like cheap for people. Like obviously that's not cheap, but like it's much
right.
cheaper.
But yeah, the barrier to entry is a lot lower.
Yeah, exactly.
At that point.
So that's why when we were looking to start a second company, we were like, it needs to be either really hard to get into or it needs to be super custom. So that's why we did the luggage.
And yeah, I mean, did you do some research on, what are really popular things that people buy, or a price point? You know, it's like, luggage seems so random. You know, it's like,
yeah. I mean, so we were looking at like, obviously companies like Samsonite and Tumi, we were looking at them to like, and then we're looking at prices, and we're just like, whoa, like how come the luggage, like a good luggage costs like $1,000 to like $2,000 if you look at that. And we're just like, we can make it for much cheaper. And that's really where we saw the competition. We're just like, obviously just like look at public numbers of how much they're selling. And then if you're using Amazon, there's like Jungle Scout. That's a really good tool. Shows you like all this stuff. And a lot of this time too, I think it's interesting because almost everything's on Amazon now. But obviously back then, a lot of these big brands like Samsonite or Tumi, for example, they would never be seen on Amazon because they're too good for it. But now it's like, it was that sort of like, advantage. We're like, hey, look, Amazon doesn't have a great luggage company on there. Everybody has like the basics on there, but we want to make a nice premium luggage, and we know that Amazon has demand from our previous company. So it's like everything's a combination of what you've learned before. So I tell people like, you just learn more as you're doing things, and like it might succeed, it might fail, but like your next company, you're kind of learning something, and then you're like, oh, I learned this before. Like I said for Amazon luggage, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want to do what I did for the outdoor gear company because that sucked. So let me go do this.
Yeah. What are some things that you liked about running a service-based business, and what are some of the things you like about running a product-based business? So
the service-based business, what's good about it is like you don't pay people unless like you have an actual like booking. So your cash flow is much easier to manage. Cash flow for like Chester, for example, right now we have a lot of inventory. It sucks because Corona.
No one's traveling.
But yeah, we have like 100K in inventory in the warehouse that's just sitting there. So you think about it, it's like dead stock. It's like, okay, your cash is just literally doing nothing. Same thing when like when you're shipping overseas, your cash is just floating in the ocean. We call it. It's like, hey, I'm trying to like, what am I going to sell you? Right? It's like, it's just like doing nothing. So that's why like e-commerce is great because it's scaling wise. So that's why e-commerce is good, because if it's selling, you can just order more. And then service-based businesses suck because if you're getting more cleanings, that means you need more humans. Humans are not predictable. So so it's like a different, so humans are not predictable. Trust me. Like we have all the like, we're like, oh my God. Like,
Someone calls, hey, where's my cleaning person? You're like, they're supposed to be there.
Yep. No, trust me. That's like almost like a daily text that we get in our Slack. Like,
right. I'm sure.
Yeah. So
Oh man. And so then with a product-based business, though, is it something where the profit margins are a lot higher than on a service-based business?
Yeah, so that's exactly it. Like, it really depends. With the service-based business, it's kind of like you have to just like pay people, and the people cost money. So then like there's always this cost that goes up every year of like minimum wage, benefits, of the more you hire, and then the office cost. But with like product-based businesses, you just make a little bit more money. But at the same time, it's kind of like you have to make a recur. So like I've learned a lot. Like I'm doing another company, and I'm just like I learned so much from this other company. So I'm like Chester. Basically, what you're seeing with paid stuff is like it's just getting more and more expensive. So your one-time cost to sell a product is just getting so high that you need to have to sell people things on the back end. If not, you almost have no profit margin. So I always tell people now, if you're thinking about a company, you need to have something that you can sell to the front end at a great profit margin, or even like maybe at break even. But then you have to have a recurring component to it, because that's where you make your money. Right now, like Chester is kind of like a one-time sale. Like you sell a luggage, like yeah, someone might buy another luggage, but like not that many. Not two, not three.
The sales cycle's a lot longer, right? With someone maybe buys a new piece of luggage every 3 to 5 years.
So like you're really like, if you want to compete, and like people are always like, oh, D2C brands, you can scale quicker. But I'm like, you can, because there's no like, I guess like stores, but then your new middleman is Facebook and Google. They're collecting all the rent essentially. So it's still hard to scale, because now, especially Corona now, like everybody's online. So it's like, it's just even more expensive. And I think for any business now, it's like you need a sort of recurring thing. That's why like stuff like gyms are great, because it's like every month, like people pay for it and they don't go. So it's like, yeah, great. It's like, that's sort of the right business model. It's like people pay for the gym and they don't ever go. So, yeah. So it's like, that's the thing, like I would tell people to think about. And that's sort of what I'm thinking about too, my next business. It's like, how do I get someone hooked up? And then how do you make it recurring? That way you can justify the cost of selling that product.
The first examples that come to mind for me are like, what's the name of that toothbrush? It's like
Quip.
Yeah, Quip. Quip is a good example, because you buy the toothbrush. It's pretty inexpensive up front. It's nice. There's a subscription for toothpaste delivery. Same thing with like Harry's razors, that kind of stuff.
I haven't bought toothpaste in a year. It just keeps getting shipped to me every 3 months. I get a new tube with toothpaste.
Yeah, those guys like figured it out right early. It's exactly like the Quip is like the vehicle. It's like, hey, we'll sell you this thing, but we know we might not make money. But that recurring of the fluids, the liquids, that's where they make money, because that's also much cheaper to produce. The physical product has like a raw cost, whereas like everything else,
That's awesome. I'm really curious what your next business is going to be. You'll have to let us know.
I'll let you know. Yeah, it's coming soon. It's in development. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
So you have all these different businesses, and then at some point you said, hey, I'm doing all these things for myself, and I'm starting my own businesses. At some point you said, all right, I think I want to use my knowledge to help other businesses grow and, produce income. So that's where kind of Voy Media came.
Yeah. So basically Voy Media came out of that sort of need, where it was two needs. One where I thought like, hey, look, I think I have this entrepreneurial experience that other agency owners don't have, that I can really think about and work with other founders. And that's sort of where I come in. Is like me and Wilson, we've built our own business. We have our own companies that still run. We saw like, hey, we want to work with, we think that other agency owners don't have that. So we want to say like, hey, look, this is why you should work with us. At the same time too, it was kind of a mix of, obviously I run stuff. It's kind of feed my curiosity. I was like, oh, what else are people working on? So it's just like, that was also a great way for me to just kind of like feed that like need of like trying to see what other business models people are running. And honestly, that's how I learned much more now. I'm like, I look at stuff, we're working with some clients. I'm just like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. Like, I was like, oh, wow, this thing works. I was like, this is crazy. I was like, it's like, and that's just like interesting. So that's why I like it. And that's sort of kind of where that came from. And now Voy Media is like 20 people. And like, we use it a lot to just like, it helps with cash flow, right? Helps me fund my ideas, my projects. I'm like, oh, cool. Yeah. So that's what I think about it. Yeah.
I was curious about that, because one of my thoughts and strategies with Knapsack, we build websites on Squarespace. And one of the things that I wanted to do with that is have it as a funding source for my other business idea. I was curious, like, which one of these projects you've done has been a good funding source to kind of help you build other stuff?
I think my main one that really helped me launch a lot of stuff was Made Sailors. That provided me the capital to kind of start everything, because it's kind of like money comes in and then you just pay people. But now Voy Media has grown to be that, where it's like we have a lot of great clients, we have a lot of great brands that we work with, and we've raised our prices and allowed us to scale. But now Voy Media is helping us do that, and just taking a lot of the money to invest into new ideas and just new projects. And a lot of now for Voy Media too, it's kind of like investing into like the content that we produce. Obviously we have our podcast, we do our YouTube series, a lot of like LinkedIn stuff. That's helps us with that. Just like think of things to produce. Cause a big initiative for us is like, obviously Voy Media is like the service-based side, but we're trying to make it in the next 6 months. How do we make it more like educational /information side? Because that's easier to scale up than like hiring more people. It's kind of like we want to make it a mix of kind of like e-commerce / service. For services, like we want to bring more clients, but that means we need to train more media buyers, more strategists. So at a certain level, Wilson and I kind of trying to figure out like what size do we want to be that we're kind of happy, because then you guys probably know, like the bigger you get, the more people you have to manage. And that's like kind of a different thing that you have to learn. And it's just tough. And it's kind of, some people like, I don't know, we're always in this, like, I'm always in this phase of like, do I really want to grow a big agency or do I want to be small? And it's kind of like, every other week I change my mind, and just like, it's so hard. Like, it's too hard.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things I'm always thinking about. On one end, I like the idea of having a large team, and I like the idea of, having a really big company that's recognized and all these other kind of things. On the other side of things, I really love the autonomy and the freedom that I have. And I love that I don't have a job. I don't always feel like I go to a job. We have a small team of 3 people, and, we just have a great time, and we provide value to our clients, and we enjoy the work that we do. And it never feels like a job that I'm going to. And I'm always afraid if I grow too big that at some point it will feel like a job where I'm like managing all these people, and these payrolls are so massive. And,
I know that feeling. It's we always struggle with that. It's like, it's like at one point our goal was to be like 150 people, and we're just like, oh crap. Like, this is like,
One thing you said reminded me of one of the guests that we had on our show. His name is Greg Hickman. He has a company called Alt Agency. I think he was on episode 23 and 24 of our podcast, but he talked a lot about kind of what you're saying, like having some training products that you have as an agency, as well as like your done for you services. So he goes a lot into like done with you, done for you, DIY options. So he might be actually even a good connection to talk to. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he has a lot of thoughts on that I found really useful too.
Yeah, that's exactly kind of where we're going to. It's like we're getting a lot of leads that we can't help because they're just too new. And then we're trying to offer different price points. Like I have a book out that I give to tell people, hey, read my book. And then we also have like a consulting service now where it's basically one-on-one hour teaching to help you sort of figure out like your product market fit. And then the other one is obviously our agency service where we do everything for you. But like in between there, it's like we need a training or something, right? It's like we just can't help everybody. I'm just like, I wish I could, but like, you guys probably work with people. I'm just like, you don't even know what your product is. Like, I can't help but to figure out yourself. Like, I can't. Yeah. I'm like, I don't know what your product is. How can I sell it? Like, you don't even know yourself. Like,
that's Chris Do from Future. Have you heard of him? Yeah, he kind of started off as a designer, and then he similarly just started creating educational content for designers to grow their businesses and, things like that. And it seems like it's become extremely profitable and successful for him just to be an influencer, in the space.
That's sort of what we're trying to figure out is how do we make more content, because we have a lot of stuff. We just need to package it well and sell it to people.
That's awesome. Do you have any pitfalls that you've kind of come into that you're like, oh man, if I could warn people about this problem, like when starting this type of business, like what are some things that we can learn from so we don't make those mistakes?
I think the biggest lesson that I've learned was that, like, at least for me, like not everybody's like me. And I think everybody I hire, I want them to be like me. But then you realize that like, it's kind of like everybody's a little bit different. And I think you need to really understand people and sort of who you're working, because even right now, like I have a lot of employees that are like, oh, I love working from home. But then I have other ones that are just saying like, oh, I really miss the office, because they're like being there. So it's like, you have to learn to be adaptable. And I think for me, that was probably one of the biggest things that took me to learn, because I was like, why aren't people just like me? Like literally just like, if I tell you to do something, just go figure it out. Right. And then you realize that like, not everybody's like that, and that's okay. Because not everybody can be like entrepreneurs or starters. It's like some people just want to be kind of like, hey, this is your project. Here's how we're going to break it down and do it together. And they love that. And then they're just happy executing, versus like other people just help strategic thinkers and think of ideas. So I think that's the biggest lesson for me. It's like learning how to work with people and actually seeing how they like to be done. And like, at least for me, it's like not everybody can be like me. So it's like that was like the biggest pain point. I was like, I would get so frustrated. I was like, why don't you just do it? It's like, I'll just Google it. I was like, oh my God.
Yep. Hey, if everybody's like you, there would be 100 Chesters out there,
And so that is actually funny, because like that's sort of like what someone told me, and I was like, oh, that makes sense now.
What do you look for when you're hiring your team? I'm sure it's different for different companies, but what are some like qualities that you look for in people usually?
So for us, for the biggest thing for us right now is just like if you're smart, like raw intelligence. I always try to look for that and sort of see. And just like honestly, the biggest one is problem solving skills. And I think that comes
Mhm.
from like I do marketing and I've never taken a marketing class, right? And I tell people like, but can you be able to solve problems? Can you think of things, have common sense? I think that's a big one. I think that's a hard
Yeah.
one to find sometimes, but like just problem solving, I think is the biggest one for people, and just like raw intelligence. Because honestly, like there's like at least for us, we're high like media buyers or like Facebook guys. It's Facebook is just a platform. There's Google ads, there's YouTube ads, but if you know like how to kind of like figure out how to use a platform, how to read the numbers, like click through rates, conversion rates, like the platforms don't matter. It's just like a thing that you're using. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of like a designer. Like a good designer can like draw and then probably use Photoshop or Illustrator, but like the design skill is there, or like the naturalness of designing and spacing and stuff like that, like stuff like that. So
What about what is your favorite platform? I mean, it seems like you've been doing this for a while, as far as like, paid ads on Facebook and Google
I
and
love SEO.
SEO.
Yeah, I love SEO. I think SEO is the best, but obviously if you're doing paid stuff, probably Facebook and Instagram are still pretty good. And now we're seeing Snapchat do well, but like depends on the product. But Facebook and Instagram are still pretty good. But I think if people are looking for a good platform now, YouTube is pretty good. A lot of traffic. It's kind of like not as regulated as Facebook because like there's hasn't been any big scandals on YouTube. So like you see a lot of gurus on there saying the crazier stuff. So
Yeah.
just use that platform now while you have a chance.
Before it gets too crazy. What is what are some resources that you really enjoy? I mean, are there certain things that you kind of stay up on as far as educating yourself or motivating yourself and stuff like that? Are you a reader? Do you read books?
Yeah, so I read a lot of books. Right now I'm listening to this book by John Doerr. It's called Measure What Matters. It's about OKRs and management of people. Really good book about how he introduced OKRs to IBM and how that worked, what the process is like, and how they really help a company achieve their goals. Another good book that I read is The CEO Within. So a lot of management books. How to actually manage people and how to set structures and meetings. I think that's super important for people, especially something like me, I guess, where like I never worked at a super corporate environment. I was at Mint or Intuit, right? But that was only for like 6 months. So it's not like I grew up and knew this stuff. And,
Yeah.
and I think as your company grows, you kind of need to actually have some sort of process procedure. It's not there to like slow you down. It's just sort of like there to sort of like kind of like know what people are doing. It's like in the beginning, at least for me, it was like, oh, there's a flat hierarchy. Kind of like people like love saying that, but as you get bigger, it's like people need to know kind of like who can I go to for issues or problems. And I think for me and Wilson, we're just kind of like, oh, just come to us. But eventually, we're just like, whoa, like I wake up, I have like 30 PMs. I'm like, I can't do this. Like I just literally can't like understand what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. So like stuff like that. It's like you realize like this is why there's managers in companies.
Yeah. How long have you worked with Wilson?
Oh, Wilson's like my best friend. So yeah, well, we've been working with each other since we were probably trying to think. So he's 3 years younger than me, and
Okay.
so probably since I was like 20, and he
So you guys have kind of like worked all your businesses together.
kind of. So basically, it's funny because Wilson. So I mean, Wilson we do a lot together. We started one tiny bit, and then I moved to California, and that
Yeah.
summer. I got Mint. Wilson's like, I'm gonna go to California too because you're there. So he like literally stayed and lived in my couch for like the whole summer because I got him an internship at another company. And then he was there, and then we went back to college. And then I was still working, and then he got a job at Google. And then he was living with me there while he was working at Google. And then there I went to my other company. And then after Google, he went to Salesforce. And then he also lived with me in my next apartment. So, but in between this, we were still working on stuff like how we call it. We just call it like hacking on things. Just like, hey, let's work on something, right? Yeah. Let's hack
So
on
how have you guys remained friends and business partners?
Yeah, so Maid Sailors, the cleaning company, that was just my company. I told Wilson, I'm like, hey, like I want to do my own thing, and he wasn't ready, right? He's like, hey, I still love it here. Salesforce is a great company. Obviously, you guys know they paying him a ton of money. Like I'll go to his office and I'll just be like, he's like, yeah, let's go at dinner. I'm like, okay, cool. Like they're paying for everything, right? So it's like a great company. So I did the cleaning company. And then about 2 years after that, Wilson then left to do his own thing. And by this time he was kind of like into like just traveling and like anybody, I guess, like, oh, I'm gonna find myself,
Yeah.
right? It's like, and then that's when he started doing his own e-commerce company. So even though we stayed friends for the longest time, Voy Media is probably our first company that we started together most recently. But everything else between that was more like, let's just work on stuff because we're friends and we like to make things together. But then, and then we just like help each other along the way. So Voy Media is like our company that we work on tough stuff. And right now, how it's structured for Voy Media is like I really deal with all the management side and the sales sides of bringing new clients, and Wilson helps like the internal operations of like making sure that each client's like fulfilled. So we both know what our roles are. Like I tell people I was a programmer. People are like, oh, you're speaking all the time. Like, well, like that's the role I have to play, and like I know what I got to do, and I'm gonna go do it. And it's like we both know what the goal is, right? The goal is to like obviously make money, but also just like be freedom, grow a company, do your own thing. And I'm like, he's like, Wilson's like, we just got to decide and just accept it. I'm like, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go do it, right? So it's like, yeah. I think a lot of it has to do just like we just like understand that what we both want in life, and we're both trying to achieve that. And I think it's sort of like we obviously we get into arguments, but I'm like, okay, cool. Like I trust you. Like I think a lot of it's like I trust you, and I know that you're making the best decision for the company. So it's not like you're letting it. You're trying to hurt me or the company that we work for. It's like we're both trying to just do what's best. And if it sucks and we make a mistake, all right, cool. Like whatever. Like we learned something.
How do you guys figure out finances and stuff? Is it like a 50-50 split, or like how does that work? Or are you just each salaried and you get paid, according to your roles?
Yeah, so we each get a salary, and then we also just like we also have an accountant that just does it every month for us. So it's like they just take care of it. Yeah. So I mean, like at this point, like we just work with an accountant. I think it's easier, and then everything's split into like its own like bank account and stuff like that. Like this is like years of it, like me like learning from my previous company. Like like once you mix all the stuff, I'm like okay, new company, like just separate everything. It's like it's much easier to figure out what your finances are. Like I tell people like that's probably the number one thing you need to figure out.
That's awesome. Is there any other principles or things you would want to leave our audience with, things that you've learned along the way that you think have helped you be successful? I mean, you definitely seem like the type of person that loves learning and you just actually enjoy it almost like it's a game. Like, all right, let's see if I can figure this out. So like, is there anything you would kind of leave people with?
I think obviously people I think the biggest thing is just be curious about how things work. Like, and that's like the biggest thing. Like for me, it's like luggage is like, I don't know how that worked, but I want to learn. Like, oh, cool. Let me go figure it out. Right. Like cleaning. I never clean. I hate cleaning. Like I just like, I hate cleaning, but I'm like, oh, this is a pretty interesting business. Like, I think it's just curiosity. And I think the biggest thing I tell people, it's like, you don't really have to like, I'm not passionate about all the stuff I'm doing, but I'm passionate about marketing and learning. And that's what drives me to do things. So I think people sometimes get caught up in like, you got to be passionate about this. I'm like, no, not really. I think you can be passionate about learning and making money and just doing things. But that's sort of what I tell people. It's like something, and also the thing about it too, it's like your first business or second business might not be the one that you're going to be working on your whole life. Like for me, it's like I did cleaning, I did the e-commerce again. Now I'm doing the agency. Now I'm doing my other company. It's like I'm always trying to I think everybody's trying to figure out what they want. And I think people are like, oh, I want to figure out what I want right now. I'm like, no, just like take a stair step approach. Like, okay, you go one level, next level, you just level up. I tell people you get a little bit better and better.
I love that. I wrote down some takeaways. Mark, do you have any other questions before I jump into my takeaway?
No, this has been a fantastic interview, and it's just very fascinating to hear your story, and I'm excited to follow you and see where you continue to grow, man.
Well, thank you.
All right. Quick takeaways. You can correct me, Kevin, if I'm misquoting you on any of this. All right. So one thing you said that stood out to me is kind of like quitting quickly. I mean, quitting well, but like don't letting like jobs drag on when you know it's not a good fit. Like I think that was a really interesting principle, and that it's like getting out of a bad relationship. You might as well like cut it off now instead of like letting it drag on. I think another thing was looking at the people around you to hire and help you, like your mom, like your sister, your brother, just like who's around me that can fix this, and like looking close to you. I think that's pretty cool. That works. E-commerce being kind of more scalable and higher profit margin in some cases, but service-based businesses being easier in some ways because you can pay people only when they do the work. So some of the pros and cons of that, I thought that was interesting. Also, the advice on e-commerce to be able to sell something on the front end and then do some type of subscription or upsell on the back end where you really make your profit. I thought that was really good advice. You said not everybody has to be like you when you're hiring them. And that was one of the things that you learned, that when you're hiring people, look for problem-solving skills. I think that's great advice. And then you mentioned the Measure What Matters book, which I'll look into. And your parting advice was to be curious about how things work.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Boom. Kevin Urrutia, everybody. thank you so much for being on The Friday Habit.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you for listening to The Friday Habit. Hey, go to thefridayhabit.com to find show notes for this episode. There you can also find links to our websites and ways to get in touch. At the bottom of the page, you can download our guide to the Friday Habit system that will show you how to set aside one full day each week dedicated to working on your business instead of in your business.
And if you enjoyed this episode, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and review. And we'll talk to you soon.
That's right. And until next time, live every day like it's Friday.